So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our LCS virtual speaker series. We have a really special speaker for us tonight. But before I turn it over to Jeremy Hansen's children, let me first just say a couple of words by way of introduction. Everyone always asks if our community is healthy, and so let me just begin by saying yes, please knock on wood. We remain a happy and healthy community. This picture here is from one of our Wellness Wednesday initiatives last week. We have a good number, close to 30 dog walkers who join me every Wednesday. So that's been a special initiative this year, as we're all working hard to get outside more and be active. In terms of our authentic learning strategic direction, I snapped these two photos this week to give you a little glimpse about what learning is like on campus. This, of course, is Pete O'Grady, who is welcoming one of our students remotely. So this kind of hybrid learning is the experience for about 25 students on campus right now. And then, of course, you can see some of our Pete O'Grady's class outside here by the Guild Hut. And I can't remember what exactly they were doing in terms of the experiment, but they were totally into it as I got this picture of them. We have a new schedule this year, and it's really slowing down the pace of learning. And so, again, we're just, all things considered, with the way the world is, we're really grateful that we can be together and learning in person. As you know, another priority for us is outdoors every day. I also just snapped this picture on the left just before this call so that you can get a chance to see what the campus looks like these days at night. So we had a day off for all of our teachers, and it was a surprise for students to have a decorating day. And so every house got a tree, and so you can see sort of an attempt to make them look like their house colors. And it's definitely a campus that has been decorated by teenagers. I'll just put it that way. And on the right is one of our houses, Memorial House. They went a little bit all out. I hate to be competitive, but I think theirs was the best. So campus does not look like what it would look like when you were here, if we have some alumni on the line, but it definitely is bringing a lot of joy to all of us at a time when we all need it, don't we? And finally, this is a slide from chapel. We are still doing chapel twice a week. It's a little bit more complicated. Just one house at a time is actually coming into chapel, and everyone else is joining remotely. And I'm so proud of our students because our environmental group called LEAF has been really working on our community and how we can even be even better. And so this week in chapel, they gave us a talk about how we are going to be moving our own plastic containers, our food containers, into something that can be reused. We have been doing recycled, and now we're going to be able to reuse them. So they're really pushing us on our value of outdoors every day to take on the responsibility of giving back to the planet and making the world a better place. So great work done by our students. And my final update is to give you this glimpse of our second property that we call Northcott. And it's been a really exciting fall as we envision what we will do with this property. And we're excited that Paul Desmarais has been chairing a task force, and we've had input from students and staff, alumni, board members, and friends of our community. And we've been doing research for 5 weeks. And so I invite you, if you're interested in this kind of thinking, to check out one of the webinars. Next week is our 5th and final. So we've heard from Hotchkiss, Lawrenceville, and Northfield Mount Hermon, along with McGill and now Clearwater Farms. So it's a really exciting time and just a good distraction for us to think about something other than the pandemic. As a community, we are taking all of the safety precautions really seriously. And it's just been also a joy to have a few times where it feels like life is almost normal, and we're looking for any opportunity that we have to have that glimpse of hope in the future. For now, I want to pause there and give you a couple of housekeeping points. We will have time for a Q&A, so please enter your questions into the bottom of the screen, the Q&A box. We have a moderator who's joining us today, and we'll take care of those questions with Jeremy. And secondly, all of our speakers are being recorded, and so I invite you to enjoy this session tonight, share it with friends, and of course see other ones if you would like. I'm super excited to introduce two of Jeremy and Catherine's three children. We're so fortunate to have Devin, Caitlin, and Ashley here. And I'm gonna now turn it over to the two girls who pre-recorded an introduction of their dad. And without further ado, over to Caitlin and Ashley.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Hansen.
And I'm Ashley.
And we're happy to be introducing our dad to you today as grade 9 boarders from LCS and telling you a bit about his background. Born in London, Ontario, Jeremy has been an astronaut with the CSA since 2009. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Space Science with first-class honors from Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario from 1999, and he earned a Master of Science in Physics from the same institution in 2000.
Jeremy is an experienced CF-18 fighter pilot, and in 2017 he became the first Canadian to be entrusted with leading a NASA astronaut class, which means that he was in charge of training the astronaut candidates from the United States and Canada.
While he awaits a flight assignment to a space mission, Jeremy is keeping busy.
He represents the CSA at NASA, speaks to young Canadians, works at NASA's Mission Control Center as Capcom, the voice between the ground and the International Space Station, and continues his training. That's a little bit about our dad, and now we welcome him to tell you more. Thank you.
Oh, that's sweet. That's great. Well, good evening, everyone. It's wonderful just to spend a little bit of time with you. I wish we could connect in person, but I'm grateful for this opportunity. Of course, I'm going to start, or I'm going to spend some time tonight sharing what's going on in space, and more importantly, the future of space, not just exploration, but what we envision space doing for Canada and the world. So I'm going to start sharing some slides with you here. But before we get into space, I really wanted to start here at Lakefield. My wife, Catherine, and I, our hearts are just filled up with what we've experienced through our three children at Lakefield. Our son was there last year, wonderful experience, and then all three of our kids are there this year. And we just have to say we're really taken by the leadership shown by the school. I'm sure a lot of you online tonight have a sense of that yourself, but just the culture and the spirit of Lakefield is really taking these students through a tremendously challenging time of providing a really bright spot in their lives. And so to Anne-Marie and to all of the staff at Lakefield who are making this possible, and to the students who happen to be watching, you are all just doing a tremendous job to get through what is an extraordinarily tough time. And I know you probably hear that a lot, and maybe we start to pay it lip service, but this is an extraordinary time for at least this generation, and you're just doing a tremendous job. We're so grateful. I found it hard. I haven't, and I know there are parents right now that their situation is even worse, but I haven't seen these three kids since September when I dropped them off, and I'm very fortunate I'm going to get to see them in December for Christmas. I'm quarantining right now in Canada to do that. But I just really missed this is a picture from last year when Devin was at Lakefield, and we had the opportunity to visit, pretty much monthly, and to still do some really special family activities like this camp backpacking trip in Sedona. So I'm really missing that, and I'm very optimistic about the future and getting back to these types of activities. And let me just switch gears back to space a little bit, but really my theme tonight is about redefining what's possible. And for me, when I look back at my life, I was inspired by these images. The fact that humans traveled to the moon, walked on it, left boot prints, and came back safely changed what was possible in my mind as a young Canadian. And I just set a goal of becoming a space explorer. It was a naive goal at the time, but I didn't see why not. And people around me were telling me this was possible. And this influenced my life, redefining what's possible and just setting a goal guided me. I joined the Air Cadet program. I learned how to fly. And more importantly, I learned about confidence, leadership, how to be a good Canadian citizen. That led me to the Royal Canadian Air Force. And of course, you don't need to be a fighter pilot to be an astronaut. There are many paths to being an astronaut, but that did prepare me to apply to be an astronaut. And in 2009, in that photo, you see me with David St. Jacques, my colleague, who got back from space not too long ago now. We were hired as two Canadian astronauts and moved to Houston, Texas. I've been down there ever since. A good portion of my job is training, getting ready to go to space, like you see in this photo, doing spacewalk training, for example, in an enormous pool that we have at the Johnson Space Center, where we can have like full-scale model of the International Space Station for practicing spacewalks, but other activities too, learning robotics or working Capcom, like Ashley and Caitlin were saying. All those kinds of things are going on. But by and large, I spend a lot of my time as just part of this enormous, incredible international team that is taking on some huge, huge challenges in space. So in Canada, we have Astronaut Corps 4 active astronauts. So you saw a picture of David earlier, and then Josh and Jenny are in the center of this photo. We hired them in 2017. Like my girls were saying, Josh and Jenny were part of the 2017 astronaut class at NASA. And we graduated 11 American astronauts, and then Josh and Jenny. And so the 4 of us of course, work very closely together, but are integrated into a much larger international corps, which is a really, really rich experience for us as Canadians to be able to do that. One of my jobs recently, which is a pretty fun part of my job, was to be a family escort for my good friend and classmate, Mike Hopkins, and his family. And so Mike was on this rocket. There were 4 souls on this rocket that blasted off in November. This is the SpaceX Falcon 9. And this was just the second time that it carried humans into space. And it's the first time that we're actually just doing a normal operational rotation to the International Space Station. So those 4 astronauts are going to spend 6 months on board the International Space Station. And my job was really simple. And I think it'll probably resonate with you. The values of Lakefield is, we are a corps, we're a family, our astronaut corps, and we lean in and take care of one another. We understand that that is incredibly important. And sometimes it's even more important than the technical training is our interpersonal skills and how we come together and work as a team. So my job was simply to go to the Cape, quarantine with Mike's wife, Julie, and just take care of all of her needs leading up to the launch to make sure that, we're minimizing the amount of stress leading up to something like that and ensuring she got time to spend together as a family before Mike left the planet. And so that's a really fun part of my job. This video was just put online, I think today. And this is what it looked like when the SpaceX capsule arrived at the International Space Station to dock. Now, this wasn't actually the crew arriving. This was a cargo vehicle that arrived just a few days ago. But it gives you just a tremendous view of what arriving at the International Space Station looks like. This is a time-lapse video. It's sped up because obviously rendezvous go pretty slowly. We're pretty conservative when we try to dock 2 vehicles in space. We take things one step at a time, of course, but as it gets over top of the space station here, you can see there's another Dragon capsule. I'll kind of circle it with my mouse right here at the bottom. And that's the one that Mike and his crew went to the space station just a month ago. And then this one is coming in, it's going to dock on what we would call the zenith, so the top side of the space station. And you can see, you got to see going from daylight to nighttime. Of course, that happens every 45 minutes on the International Space Station. You either have a sunrise or a sunset. So it's a pretty cool place to work, of course. And this is what that capsule looks like when it approaches and docks to the International Space Station. And of course, if you're paying attention at all, you know that this is relatively new. We have a commercial market. Of course, so there's been a lot of government funding and kind of as an anchor customer, but we now have a commercial market of sending cargo to space and now humans to space. And it won't be long until we'll see commercial astronauts flying to the International Space Station from Kennedy, from Florida. So pretty neat. I was telling you a little bit about the International Space Station. You know, to me, it's a school in space. You know, we're always learning. This is what humanity does. We're always pushing the envelope, trying to improve ourselves. And that's what the International Space Station is about. It's about providing a laboratory for us to do research. But imagine an incredible place to work. It's 400 kilometers above the surface of our planet. And if you want something to stay in orbit there, it has to travel about 28,000 kilometers an hour, which means you go around the planet once every 90 minutes. So in the time you and I would watch a great documentary, after work on the International Space Station, you could float to the window, look outside and see one time around the entire planet. And I just think that is going to be one of the most incredible experiences of my life to do that. I haven't flown in space yet, I should have mentioned earlier, but I'm very fortunate to be able to fly in space. And I anticipate that's coming in the next few years, that opportunity. And I don't take that for granted. I'm very grateful for that opportunity. So here's a picture of my colleague David when he was on board the space station. He was there for 6 months. And like I said, the whole point is to learn. And so David worked on well over 100 different experiments. But the idea of the space station is not that the astronauts go up and do their own science. What's neat about the space station, if you're a contributing nation, which of course Canada is, anybody in that country, if they have an idea, a problem they're trying to solve, and you can leverage the benefits of this laboratory, like microgravity or the a different radiation environment for a medical experiment, you can send it to the International Space Station. And then the astronauts do that experiment on your behalf. We're proxy scientists. So this is how we get the most benefit and the most science out of the International Space Station. Canada's focus, we do lots of different experiments, but we do have a focus on human health. And the International Space Station is really neat because of that different radiation environment, but also it emulates rapid aging on the body. So for an elderly person, if you're talking about osteoporosis or some other aging process, what you might see in a year or two on Earth, we can see in a month with an astronaut. And fortunately, a number of those effects do reverse when the astronauts return because we're relatively healthy before we go, but allows scientists to look into some of those features and try to unravel mysteries that can help us live better lives on the planet. So science is important, but I believe that one of the most valuable returns on our investment with the International Space Station is the fact that we are learning to do something hard and challenging and important as an international collaboration. And so this is kind of a neat photo because you see David in there, but you see Americans, Russians, and then of course in the partnership, the International Space Station is not in this photo, but we have the Japanese and then the European Space Agency, which is comprised of many different countries. And we can all agree, we don't always get along here on the planet. We have some challenging relationships here on Earth, but in space, we work together and we absolutely depend on one another. It's very interdependent. And so I guess, when we look around and we say we maybe have the illusion that we can't tackle a tough challenge on the planet together, well, the space station disproves that. And it is literally a shining example in the sky of what humanity can do when we dig in, set big goals, and we work together. So kind of returning to redefining what's possible. If you've been watching these SpaceX launches at all, you may have noticed that something peculiar and new has been happening for the last few years, and that is the rockets are coming back to land and be reused. And this is incredible. But what I'd really like to share with you about this is that when I started at NASA just over a decade ago, a lot of SpaceX was talking about doing this, and there were a lot of really experienced people who were saying that this wasn't possible. They were resolute that this would never happen. And I was kind of like, well, what do I know? I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm just the guy on the top of the rocket who pushes the buttons. So maybe they're right. These people have been doing this for decades and they're saying it's not possible. Well, it's possible and they're doing it all the time. And I think that's really, really important for us to remember, is that we can set big goals and it's okay to fail along the way in our lives, but we have to set those big goals to drive the big advances. And here's another very Canadian example. If you look on your $5 bill, you'll see an image of Canadarm, which you may know less about is this 2-armed robot that's on the end of Canadarm. I'm kind of circling it with my mouse here. This robot is called Dexter. It's removable. It's not on the end of Canadarm all the time, but Canadarm can move this 2-armed robot around. And when I arrived in the space program, Dexter was already on board the International Space Station, but it wasn't doing anything productive. It was just being tested. And there were a lot of naysayers. I remember people telling me it was nothing more than a paperweight and would never be useful. And you don't know much about Dexter because it just quietly goes about its business. But we are doing robotic operations on the space station almost every single day, very few exceptions. And what Dexter can do is what humans used to have to do. So if you need to remove a box, like a battery box or a computer box that's failed on space station, Dexter can go up, grab that box, remove the bolts, and swap it out for a new one. And Dexter's doing all sorts of amazing things. We are constantly expanding the envelope of what Dexter can do. And this is another example of something that people thought could not be done or could not be done safely, and something we're doing all the time now. A very Canadian example of that. Now, that's human space exploration, but let's think a little bit about our planet and how space is affecting our lives on the planet. And so a long time ago, Canadians realized that we could leverage space to enable communications, for example. Our vast country, we could put a satellite in space, we could bounce signals off it, and we could communicate more efficiently across our country. And that industry was initially government supported, but now it's evolved. And government recently supported Telesat in working on delivering high-speed internet from low Earth orbit, so to be low latency, high speed, and it'll be available everywhere on the planet. You may have heard of Starlink. This is a SpaceX company that's doing the same thing. I won't get into details, but they're, I guess, sort of competing technologies, but they're very different niche markets. And so there's a real need for both of these solutions on the planet. But in the next number of years, you are going to see that we will have high-speed internet around the entire globe. And that's incredible. In space, you know, it's gone from solutions that used to be in what we would call geostationary orbits, far away from the planet, down to these lower Earth orbit orbits, I guess, where when you create a solution, it becomes a global solution. And Canada is going to be part of this new global solution very, very soon. I think that's really, really exciting. Another area we're working on this is, of course, looking back at our planet and learning about it. So if you want to take the heartbeat of the planet, there's no better place to do it than space. If you put a satellite in orbit around the poles, for example, and then the Earth spins underneath it, you can scan the entire planet. These are just a list of Canadian satellites that Canada is part of, either government-owned or government-supported or partnership with other governments. But these are just the government ones. There's a whole host of commercial satellites that are doing amazing things. There's a Canadian company, GHG-SAT, which is greenhouse gas satellite. They have a really neat business model where they're mapping the whole world to understand greenhouse gas emissions. And I was talking to the CEO recently, and they're going to get into financial markets, because financial markets need to understand where are the green companies, which companies are doing it right, are sustainable from a green perspective, which ones aren't. I just think there's so many applications to this. And of course, understanding our planet's becoming more and more important as we start to grapple with the effects of climate change. And we're starting to see them ourselves personally, aren't we? I mean, I've noticed it. I went through a flood in Houston. We have too much water some places. We have not enough water other places. We have more fires. It's changing, and the Arctic is changing fast, changing food sources for some of our northern populations, monitoring our changing coastlines, where the ice is, where the ice isn't, new shipping lanes. All of this stuff has enormous impacts on our economy. And so I know we're dealing with we're in an incredibly challenging time with respect to COVID in our economy, but we also need to think about how are we going to do this better in the future. And the writing is on the wall. Space is going to play a very, very important role. And so I was alluding to this earlier, but I think there are a lot of jobs out there for Canadians in the future. I mean, they're not just going to fall in our lap. We're going to have to be intentional. We're going to have to go after these. But I think it's important for you to know as a Canadian that the space market is expected to triple in the next 20 years. And we have spent decades harnessing science and innovation, and now we have all of these gold mines that we're sitting on that we can go out there and we can leverage, close the innovation cycle, build jobs around not just building space infrastructure, but leveraging space infrastructure. That's where most of the jobs are. And this is a really important thing that I'm spending a lot of time, speaking with decision makers about, but you as a Canadian also need to be talking about this. A market that's going to triple is a futuristic market that will support Canada in a big, big way going forward. And it goes back to changing our minds on what's possible. We can be a major, major player in this important market. And one more example on that, about 1.5 years ago, we committed to building a 3rd generation of space robotics for the Gateway, the Lunar Gateway. And the Lunar Gateway is all about building reusable transportation infrastructure out by the moon. But Canadarm3 is not just a 3rd Canadarm. It is a new, completely revamped technology. It's going to be more automated. It's going to implement artificial intelligence because we have to do things further away from the planet now. So we can't have humans in the loop anymore. We're going to need more of this automation. But this is all, we already see how this is translating back to jobs in Canada because there has never been a commercial need for space robotics. It's only ever been on the space shuttle and the space station. But today, there is a commercial market for space robotics. We see MDA winning contracts just recently with respect to this, so servicing satellites and infrastructure in low Earth orbit. There's promise of a commercial space station in the near future. We could have a Canadarm there. There's just all this potential. And these jobs in Canada are not just building the arm, but operating space robotics. It's a very exciting field for us. And then briefly, I just want to show you some of the stuff that is coming down the pipe. We have never been working on more new spacecraft than we are today. It's really, really exciting in the space business for us. NASA's building this rocket called the Space Launch System. You'll hear it called the SLS. This is to take us back to the moon. This is the capsule that goes on top of it called Orion. We're going to fly this in just a couple years, first test flight with no humans on it. These are lunar lander technologies. There's 3 of them here. And NASA put out a bid looking for companies to help us go back to the moon, to land on the moon. So here's one of them led by Blue Origin. Here's another one by Dynetics. And here's the 3rd one. This is from SpaceX. This is Starship. And it's actually, SpaceX was supposed to launch an early test version of this vehicle today. I was really hoping that it would go, and I get to show you some video because one way or the other, it was going to be spectacular. I highly recommend you watch that this week. Their chances of success are very low on these early tests. We probably see a very spectacular explosion of a rocket with nobody on it. That's okay, because they're just in the early testing phase. But that's going to be very, very exciting this week. And so all of this is just to tell you that, well, this is what it looked like on the launch pad. It actually scrubbed 1 second before launch. They had some sort of engine problem today. So this is what that test version of this vehicle, this is what they're doing right now to test it in Texas. So I just wanted to show you a few of the exciting things that are going on in space right now. I'll lead in kind of a warm up for some of the questions you might have. I look forward to answering them. But the big thing to keep in mind is that we can redefine what's possible. And for Canada, we should set bold goals, not just around exploring space, but driving those benefits that come from all the work that we have done over the decades to help us with the challenges that are facing us right now, economic challenges, job challenges. And this just isn't a government thing. People need to know that space has changed. This needs to be commercial. This needs to be a commercial push and a government push, academic push in unison. We just need to go after it. So I'm going to hand it over to Joel now, and he'll moderate some questions for us.
Just needed to find my mute button. Thanks very much, Jeremy. It's very inspiring, obviously, to hear you describe some of this big thinking and these big ideas, and some of the kind words that you had to offer for Lakefield right off the top. It's interesting as we think about posing questions for you. It's an interesting challenge for the audience to find thoughtful questions for someone who literally sees the world from a different vantage point. But I think we have. I think we've compiled a few. There have been a few that have come in throughout the discussion, as well as some that have come in from students in advance of the session today. I'll give you an easy one to start. When you have the opportunity to go to space, what are you most looking forward to? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, and I alluded to it a little bit already, so I'll just emphasize, I'm really looking forward to the perspective. I haven't been to space yet, but I've been in this industry a long time now. I have a lot of very close friends that have been to space and come back. I've had a lot of great discussions with them. And it's just, really personally obvious to me that it changes their perspective. It's sort of like, I think we have a very worldly community at Lakefield, and it's sort of like the magic of travel. If you never have the opportunity to travel and you're just kind of always stuck where you were born, you're missing out on a very special perspective. And it's very obvious to me that when my colleagues come back, that they have a new perspective, and it's very, very enriching for them. And so the opportunity to leave our planet and to look back upon it really, really excites me. I don't expect to come back like fundamentally changed, but I do expect to come back enriched for the experience. And I have one colleague who talk about it. He just recommends you spend as much time, all your free time, at the window. He said he's been to space a couple times, a couple long duration missions, and he just describes the changes that he sees on the planet over one mission, certainly between multiple missions, and how that changes his perspective of humanity's impact on the planet. That's really neat.
Fantastic. We've had a number of questions come in about how you prepare for a space mission, and I know you touched on that briefly, and we saw some fantastic photos of some of your underwater simulation training. I think I also read that you've spent some time living under the sea, some time living in caves. Just hoping you could say a little bit more about the types of training that you've undergone, and perhaps some of the tests that you do while you're in training.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'd touch on here, and people feel free to ask more questions if this is an area of interest, but is something similar to what you do at Lakefield. We actually look for opportunities to get astronauts completely out of their environment that has to do with space and challenge them in a different way, in a group setting. We've come to realize that all the technical training is really, really important, but how, an excellent crew, the difference between a good crew and an excellent and a super effective crew is their ability to work as a team. And that doesn't come easy in life. As students at Lakefield, as you would know, we as humans, there's challenges with our personal interactions. And so as an astronaut corps, we actually put a lot of emphasis on this. So we will send astronauts out on backpacking expeditions for 10 days completely off the grid in the back country, working as a team, challenging and supporting one another, but doing a lot of talking about it in the evenings, and really digging into what were the things that were good about the day, but let's really talk about what wasn't good about the day. What did I do that didn't help you during this time? We do the same thing underwater. So you talked about living underwater. I spent a week living in a habitat on the ocean floor off of Key Largo, Florida, and this is a research habitat, but you can basically imagine an RV on the ocean floor. And we went down there, it was a group of 6, And we were simulating a mission to Mars. So we had a simulated comm delay built in. So whenever we would talk to mission control, it would be a 5-minute delay until they would hear it, and then another 5 minutes until we would hear their response back. And for those of you who are wondering, it depends where Mars is in its orbit. Sometimes it might be 5-minute delay, sometimes it might be a 20-minute delay to Mars, but we just did a 5-minute delay. And so we were testing real operational aspects of deep space missions. And we would go out and simulated spacewalks, and we try to figure out how can we integrate the Earth team, all that expertise and knowledge that's on the Earth, how do we integrate that into what we're doing on the ocean floor? But on the side of that, all of that technical stuff, we were spending a lot of time talking about our teamwork skills and how we could do a better job of that, and learning to listen to one another. And these are all things that I know that the alumni you learned at Lakefield, for the students that I know you're working on, and you never stop working on it. When you take this into the workplace, the skills that are taught at Lakefield need to be brought into every workplace. These things matter. Change the environments that we live and work in. My wife works a lot on this. As a medical doctor, she has a lot of expertise, obviously, in health, but she also recognizes the need for community. And this is vital. If you want to be a high-performing human, you do not do anything of value alone. You do it as a team. And so your teamwork skills are really, really important.
Fantastic. You touched briefly on Mars, and we had a handful of questions that had come in around, whether it makes sense to invest money and time in order to go to Mars. What is your opinion on the mission to Mars? Was wondering if you could spend a little bit of time talking about your perspective on Mars.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things there. Maybe just, one of the things that I hold out for with respect to exploration of our solar system is, I think there are clues and there are answers out there. We have some really neat theories about Mars. It used to be, much more Earth-like. It used to have water on the surface, maybe even like bodies of water on the surface, maybe even running water. I mean, there's contradictory evidence there to kind of understand how much water was there and what it was doing, but maybe even running water. Definitely had a thicker atmosphere. What happened on Mars? How did that planet basically get terraformed? And some of our climate change models are, they're pretty scary of what humanity could potentially do to our planet or not. And so we know that there's change, but we probably, it would be an important wake-up call for us to really understand what our future looks like based on our present day actions. So I think that's just one really neat thing that comes out of geology and the study of the moon, the study of Mars, the study of our solar system. There's just a lot we don't know. But I really like the question about, should we invest in space, and especially, in the context of other challenges and other priorities. And we should always be asking ourselves these questions. Are we doing these things for the right reasons? And obviously, I'm sold. I've dedicated my life to this, and so I believe in it. But I don't see space as a #1 priority. I never have. I think there are other priorities, more urgent priorities. I think how we help each other on the planet and take care of one another on the planet is the most urgent priority. It would just be foolish to not leverage the benefits of space. And when I was talking about space infrastructure before, I think this is really, really key. If every country on the planet tries to duplicate space systems to solve their own regional issues, when we could split it up and work together to create global solutions, that would be ludicrous to have all of this repetition in space. We're going to cause other problems, space junk problems, collisions. We could potentially make space unusable for humanity if we're not careful. But B, from a resource point of view, it just makes sense to learn how to work together, to leverage global. We've always done, national infrastructure because that's just the way it was. That's how we lived. But we need to blow up that model. We need to create global infrastructure. Anything that can be done globally from space needs to be the focus. And we're very fortunate in Canada as a developed nation who had the foresight and the vision to invest in this technology, to have the opportunity to be leaders in that realm and to lead for the good of the planet. And so when I look at investment options, just like an investor in the market, when I look at investment options right now, space is not my #1 priority for Canada, but it's pretty high on the list, and we cannot afford to ignore it.
Maybe this is a bit specific, but I'm curious, the International Space Station and international collaboration, being what it is, and I think, theoretically that makes a lot of sense. But I'm really curious about rights to intellectual property or technology, for example, that's developed in space collaboratively through multiple organizations or multiple countries, and how that actually plays out, once technologies are commercialized, or who lays, sort of claim to, unique intellectual property.
Yeah, I'm well outside my area of expertise, so I won't go too far on this question because I don't want to get it wrong. But I do know enough that to share with you that, for example, the space robotics technology, that is Canadian intellectual property. It's protected, and there are some. Steve McLean, former Canadian astronaut, former president of CSA, when he was talking to me about this years ago, he was just, I had no idea, but he's like, there are some real gems of intellectual property in there. Space robotics is not as simple as just taking a robotic arm from the planet and putting it in space. It is a harsh environment. You go from, this is an approximation, but you go from like minus 250 degrees to plus 250 degrees in a matter of moments as you go around the planet, from the shade to being in the sunlight. Just like things like lubrication and all these types of things. It's to have that kind of expertise and that intellectual property is very, very valuable. And so when we collaborate as international partners in general, like this is happening on the Gateway, we are divvying up the responsibilities. And we're basically looking at the overall problem and saying, well, we know that you have this expertise, so you should probably do that. You have this IP, so you should do that. And we understand that we're all going to need to get a return on the investment. We're all going to need to have jobs in our own country, investments that create innovation in our own country, just like we're doing with Canadarm3 right now, where that investment is not just about building a piece of hardware and sending it to space. This is buying down the cost of technology that will be commercialized to enable better things for our planet. So I think it's not without its challenges, but we kind of know how to do it. We've been doing it for a while.
Yeah, it's interesting that concept of specialization. I didn't, you mentioned briefly in your presentation that Canada is known for focus on the body and physiology. That's something that I wasn't previously aware of. We had a couple of interesting questions about physiological changes that occur in space, and one particularly interesting one that came in about whether or not there are brain changes related to cognition, in addition to some of the known physical attributes that happen in zero gravity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. And none of the astronauts want to admit it, but no. In fact, actually, we do talk about it. We do think there are effects on the brain, and it's ongoing studies. I don't think, to my knowledge, we don't really understand, but there are some changes we have been able to measure. Something that's quite interesting is the intracranial pressure. So I'm not a physician, so I actually didn't know this before, but so your brain cavity and your spinal cord, that is like a closed system, and it has a certain pressure in it. And in space, when astronauts go to space, that pressure changes, and for some astronauts more than others. And we believe it's contributing to eyesight changes on orbit, for example, and we don't really know what other effects it's having. We live in an environment on the International Space Station with an increased concentration of carbon dioxide, just because we're very fortunate here on the planet. We have this amazing ecological balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide. We just don't have a problem with it. But in space, it's a big problem for us, and we remove the carbon dioxide. It's really fascinating, actually. We recycle the oxygen. And so we're able to capture a certain amount of the carbon dioxide, and we put it through a reaction and with some heat, and we're able to get water out the other end, and then we we either use that water or we do convert some of that water back to oxygen and hydrogen, and then we put the hydrogen back in that cycle again to collect the carbon dioxide and create more water. And so we do recycle it, but regardless of that technology, it's not efficient enough to keep us at levels, carbon dioxide levels that we have on the planet. And so we have an increased concentration of carbon dioxide, and this has an impact on the astronauts. And it's been theorized that, people will call it space brain, but it's been theorized that there is a cognitive, slight decline in space, or sometimes you kind of feel like a little bit of a fog, maybe like you would have a headache, something like that, and can impact your performance just in a minor way. And those things are being studied, but I don't think we have conclusive evidence yet. And it's just, medical is so challenging. So everything is so interrelated, and our number of people in the study is so small, it's just going to be a while before we can draw concrete conclusions.
Yeah, thanks for your candor on that one. I mean, that's probably one that doesn't get a whole lot of airtime unless we're able to ask that type of question directly to you. So that's really interesting. I know you mentioned a lot, in a very small amount of time, about the opportunity for Canada and the world to really develop a robust space economy. How do you see that playing out? Do you see the economy playing out as a source of resources, a source of tourism, a place to live? Or maybe something else, maybe other categories that we find it harder to imagine.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. I do see tourism as a small industry. But no, the real opportunity is in delivering services on the planet or monitoring the planet for data. Obviously, you can understand there's debate about climate change, for example, and what one country decides to do is great, but unless we have kind of a global commitment to climate change, we're not going to get the meaningful change that we need. And so if we're going to have global commitments to climate change, we're going to have to agree on the facts. And so producing concrete, credible facts about what's happening on our planet with respect to climate change is really, really important. That's a huge industry going forward. And I think countries that want to make a difference are going to have to be contributors to that data network. Another huge economic opportunity is it's not necessarily climate data, but it's just data in general. There is a huge opportunity for Canada to build an economy around the data, and not necessarily just the generation of the data. I think that's a small part of the jobs opportunity for Canada. The biggest part comes from all the applications, people that don't even necessarily understand how the data got in the system, but they have access to this data, and now they can help make decisions on the planet. There's just so many things that are changing. Like our RadarSat constellation, we put up 3 new RadarSat satellites recently, I guess a year and a half ago. And RadarSat's a neat technology. It uses radar and it images the planet. And it's just like I talked about before, the RadarSat constellation goes around the poles essentially, so it can map the entire planet. But RadarSat can see through, it can see right through cloud, can see right through the moisture in the atmosphere. And so it doesn't matter what the weather is, we can map our coastlines for security reasons, we can monitor ships, we can look for people polluting, we can look at the moisture levels in fields, we can look at different types of vegetation, how they're changing. But there are other things like, right now people monitor pipelines with airplanes or helicopters to make sure that they're not leaking. Well, that is being done by space. That can be done by space. It'd be done more and more from space. The more imagery you have, you can use artificial intelligence to compare the imagery. Let's say you had an image every day. You can have a computer look at that image every day for the smallest change, like maybe a centimeter change in where that pipeline was yesterday. And today it's moved. Did it crack? Was there some sort of shift? Do we need to go look? These things can just be monitored now, almost in real time, potentially. Someone was explaining to me, we will be doing the Internet of Things. So, I mean, that's probably resonates with a lot of people, and that's just about transmitting a whole bunch of data about whatever you want. Like, I don't know, where you lost your keys, or find my phone, but this kind of Internet of Things will be done from space, and it will be done everywhere on the planet. You won't have to be inside Wi-Fi connectivity to do that in the future. That's a pretty big market opportunity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think, I hope the wheels are turning for all of us, because it's not, again, it's not something that we hear a lot about in day-to-day conversation. It's not something that hits mainstream media that often. So it's inspiring to think about, to imagine the possibilities. We're getting fairly close to the end of the hour here. I was hoping to ask a couple of questions that are a little bit more geared around students and advice to students. So Anne-Marie, I see a question that popped up here. What's your best advice to students who are inspired to go to space?
Well, I think the advice for people that want to fly in space, very similar to advice I'd provide anyone, even my younger self. But academics, there's kind of three things. So academics is obviously important. So our students are looking after that, and it's not about specifically how well you do. It's about learning to learn, and learning to push yourself, and finding something you're passionate about and really going after that. So that's the first thing, is academics. The second thing I would call operational skills, and that is just getting yourself outside the comfort zone once in a while. It's why I love the fact that it's outdoors every day at Lakefield. That's a concept. It's why I go through the extra effort to get into the backcountry with my family, because I think it's important to challenge yourself, and to just kind of break the mold on the everyday. And so, like, for someone who specifically wants to be in the astronaut field, that becomes really important, that you have some experiences where you've been challenged, where you had to make decisions that weren't crystal clear what the right answer was. It was gray, and you had to just make a decision based on the information you had, and maybe a little bit your gut instinct. You have to learn that confidence to trust yourself to create solutions. So that's the second thing, learning those operational skills by challenging yourself. And the third one I touched on a lot earlier is your interpersonal skills, your teamwork skills. That really matters. When we hire astronauts, for example, we spend a lot of time looking at that. We put them in a lot of high pressure situations. We put them in situations where we intentionally ensure that they will fail at what they're trying to achieve. And we look at, what do? Do they blame others, or do they start creating a solution? That really matters to us. If I'm on board the International Space Station and there's an emergency and the station's on fire, I want somebody that recognizes the peril we're in, but is going to help me create a solution. We're either going to get out of it, or we're going to die trying. But we're not going to kind of dwell in the unfortunate, or looking at how unfortunate this situation is. We're going to try and create our way out of it, create a solution. So those are, I think, important things for all of our lives. But we specifically look for those things with astronaut selection.
And maybe one more, just as you reflect on your path, and it must seem incredible to sort of think about all the twists and turns along the way. But I was hoping that you could comment a little bit on sort of key inflection points that really, when you look back, they really made a difference in really resulting where you find yourself today.
Yeah. I mean, if I reflect on it, I just recognize how much help I had. And I had help because I shared what I was working towards. I shared my goals. I let people know what I was interested in. And then I surrounded myself with people who basically lifted me up and made things possible and provided me that guidance along the way. And that's everyone from my parents to teachers to the military. There's just so many examples of that. So setting goals for myself and sharing them with other people. But then also understanding that if you're want to go from A to B, we as humans would typically draw a straight line, and the only thing we can be certain of, there's no straight lines in life, and there's ups and there's downs. And there are definitely moments where I looked at it and said, where I definitely still had this intentional goal of flying in space, and I looked at it and said, there's no way. Just that's what my brain was telling me. There's there's no way it's going to happen. I had like, as I was going through fighter pilot training, I had this one flight where, it's a longer story, but I went through, the airplane was, the F-18 was out of control. It was falling leaf, we call it. It was falling out of the sky. And, that caused me to fail that training mission. And I knew that I wouldn't top the course. And I'd heard before Chris Hadfield topped his course. So if I want to be an astronaut, surely you had to top your course, but I didn't top the course. I thought that there's no way. That went through my head for a little while, and eventually I got over it and moved past that. And there are a number of examples like that along the way where it goes back to what I said before, you have got to get back in the creative mindset of creating something good, a good path forward, not dwelling in the past and what you think is not going to happen. I think that's probably important for us all to recognize, and I still have to talk to myself about, experiences today and remind myself, no, I mean, okay, that didn't go the way I wanted it to go, but just keep trying.
And maybe you can just, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here, but maybe you can just expand on that briefly. As a leader who is now training other astronauts, how do you build that value and that mindset, I guess, into the team that need to, many of the topics that you've covered, but the need to problem solve, sort of the value-oriented position of the job, how you're expected to be as an astronaut, not just sort of the technical skills.
Mm-hmm. It's really simple yet hard. It's so simple. It just comes down to setting aside time to communicate about it. That was my example with the class that I trained. This is a really rich experience for me. I think I taught them a number of things. I know that I learned way more from that experience than I brought to it. And it's because we intentionally made time to communicate about it. And I will tell you, for me, it was awkward. It was awkward to push these high-performing people to set aside time to really dig in to what we call them expeditionary skills in the astronaut corps. And, we list them out and we know what we're working on, but it was awkward for me to focus that group intentionally to work on those skills. And, it was awkward for them in the beginning, but every single time we did it, we got past it. And then we had this really enriching experience. And, over the course of those 2.5 years, we just went deeper and deeper and deeper. And we learned a lot.
Fantastic. We're getting close to end of time here. I feel like we could probably pick your brain for another hour tonight, but I think just in the spirit of keeping to the time allocated, we'll try and wrap up a little bit here. I just wanted to really thank you wholeheartedly on behalf of the LCS community. It's really been a privilege to be able to just simply be the point person here and coordinating the question and answer portion of the chat today. I think we can all agree that your point of view on these topics is otherworldly. Sorry, I don't know any other way to describe it, but otherworldly, inspiring. Many other adjectives come to mind. So thank you very much. Just as we wrap up, do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I'd love just a moment just to kind of reflect back. Obviously, I can't even see who's all on this call, or certainly who will be watching it in the future, but I just have such a tremendous respect for the people that have made this community what it is in the past. They were part of it, or they're part of it right now, or there's the student body, but I just have a tremendous respect for it. I feel very fortunate that my family gets to be a part of it. And I think the school represents a lot of these things that you and I were chatting about tonight, Joel. And it bodes really well for Canada.
That's probably a great point to end on. And again, I want to make sure that, Anne-Marie, Emily Ferguson, Katie Pazoulis, Cody McMahon, and everyone else who coordinates this incredible speaker series are acknowledged as well. I think this is an incredible initiative for Lakefield and engaging with the community and being able to really connect with highly, highly inspiring people like you, Jeremy. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you all. Thanks for the evening. Appreciate it. Take care.